Before we get started, real quick, I want to let you all know about some new things I've been doing with the channel. I recently enabled channel membership, so if you want to support me, that is a new way to do it. I'd prefer if you went to Patreon or Ko-fi because I get a bigger cut that way, but I figure more options isn't a bad thing, and people are already here on YouTube, so maybe some people would prefer to do it that way. There's no fancy perks or exclusive content or anything like that. It's just a way to throw me a couple of bucks if you feel like it. But for the Patreon and Ko-fi, a thing I've been doing recently is I have been posting links to my videos there a little bit early before they go up on the YouTube channel, because I normally like to upload around the same time every day, but sometimes a video is ready before that time, and it might be a couple hours, it might be even a whole day before that, so the video is just sitting there and nobody can watch it. So I figured it would be a good opportunity to provide a little perk for my biggest fans, so you can go to either my Patreon or Ko-fi and get access to my videos a little bit early. But that early access is not locked behind a paywall. You don't have to donate me anything. Anyone can just go to my Patreon or Ko-fi and watch my videos early. There's been a lot of talk in recent times about the canon of Sonic, both from fans and from the official side of things. People want to know what is canon, what's not canon, how does the timeline of the Sonic universe fit together, and all kinds of things like that. And I'm gonna be honest, I find this entire thing to be a giant pointless farce, because the Sonic series is an incoherent mess, and it's been that way since almost the very beginning of the franchise. But I think that's probably the reason that people want a clean, concise Sonic canon now. They want that mess to be straightened out. But unfortunately, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. We've already had decades of inconsistencies, contradictions, continuity errors, retcons, re-retcons, unre-retcons, as well as direction and tonal shifts for the series that are so drastic that in many ways they are just straight up incompatible with each other. And so, to me, the idea of taking that giant mess and fitting it together into one concise thing is like trying to take 5 different jigsaw puzzles and trying to put them together to make one clear image. It's just not possible. And because of that, anytime someone from the official side of things speaks up about the canon or the continuity and tries to provide an explanation as to how things are supposed to fit together, all it does is open them up to a million questions of, well, if that's supposed to be the case, then what about this thing that doesn't make sense, and this thing that doesn't make sense, and this thing that doesn't make sense? Your explanation has a bunch of holes in it. It almost seems like you kind of just pulled that out of your ass. And that's because, in most cases, that's exactly what happened. And that's how the Sonic series has operated since basically its inception. However, nowadays, things are different, because in Sega's attempt to create a more consistent Sonic universe and canon and whatever, we now have the lore team, whose job it is to make sure all these things fit together and make sense. And we can see that in more recent Sonic materials, things do fit together more consistently. Oh wait, no they don't. There's still a bunch of contradictions and continuity errors all over even the most recent of Sonic things. Sonic Prime is supposed to be canon with the game series, yet there's a bunch of stuff in there that's very incongruent with what's been established in the games. Same goes for Sonic Frontiers, Sonic Superstars, and the IDW Sonic comics. All of these things have almost just as many inconsistencies as any Sonic game from the 2000s or 2010s. They're really no better, so my question is, if there is apparently supposed to be this lore team keeping track of everything and making sure it all fits together, why does it seem like they have no impact on the actual material itself, because there's still all these problems? As far as I can tell, it seems like most of the lore team's impact exists outside of the actual content itself, where either in interviews or social media posts or whatever, they provide some kind of explanation to try justifying things that don't make sense in recent Sonic things. And as I already said, most of the time, these explanations are full of holes that, when you really think about it, it still doesn't make sense. Which is literally the exact same thing we were getting for decades prior to there being a lore team, so I don't even really see what the point is. The only hypothesis I can come to that explains this very mixed messaging between what they tell us and what they give us is that there is not as much of a sincere effort to make a coherent Sonic world as perhaps they lead on. Given what we've seen, it seems evident to me that the people actually making Sonic and making the decisions of what's gonna be in a game or a show or a whatever basically don't care whatsoever about canon or continuity or trying to make it all fit together and make sense. They just haphazardly do whatever they want to do carelessly, like they've done for decades. And then afterward, outside of the decision-making process of the higher-ups and the creatives, the lore team then has to come in and try to provide explanations for the nonsense that the creatives came up with. It's not like when someone says, let's do this, and then someone raises their hand and goes, but wait, that doesn't fit the canon. I don't think that happens. I think that if someone said that, they just get a bunch of stares and be ignored. In fact, we know that definitely has happened, because Ian Flynn has talked about how he tried to point out some of those problems in Sonic Prime, and evidently, he was ignored. And it's things like this that make me say there is no Sonic canon, or at the very least, there is no meaningful Sonic canon, which is how we end up with things like whether or not there are humans in the world of Sonic. You'd think that the answer would be pretty straightforward. Look, there are humans in older Sonic games, so humans must exist in the world of Sonic. Yet, we haven't seen a human in Sonic ever since Sonic Colors. It's as if they just disappeared off the face of the earth. What's the explanation for that? Well, allegedly, the official word right now is that humans live on the continents, and animal characters live on the smaller islands, so apparently it just so happens to be that every Sonic thing we've seen since Colors takes place on the islands, and we've just happened to never go to any of the continents where the humans live. But they're definitely still real, and they definitely still exist. There's definitely not a brand-mandated rule that says you're not allowed to put humans in Sonic. This is what I'm talking about. It's so farcical. I clearly see right through what they're saying and what is actually happening. Even when we go to places that we know humans exist in the world of Sonic, such as Spagonia, which was established to have humans in Unleashed, when we go there in the IDW comics, it just so happens to be that we never see any humans anywhere. It was tea time, you see, so everyone was staying indoors at that moment. That's definitely what happened. That was absolutely, for sure, a creative choice. And the people who made this comic definitely wanted to depict no humans anywhere. It's not at all that they were told they weren't allowed to. Classic Sonic is a similar situation, where the official word is allegedly that this takes place in the past, with a younger version of all the characters. But it's the same world, same continuity, same characters, same everything. It's just at a different point in time, but it's definitely not a separate version of Sonic, and there are definitely not hard brand-mandated rules that things in classic Sonic are not allowed to show up in modern Sonic, and vice versa. It's totally coincidental that we've never seen a modern Fang, or Bean, or Bark, or Mighty Array. It just so happened to be the case, just no one felt like making modern versions of those characters. And it's the same the other way, too. Like, Chao are one thing from modern Sonic that should still exist in the time of classic Sonic, so there are definitely Chao in the world of classic Sonic. The fact that we've never seen one ever, that is just coincidence. It just happened to be that case. But trust us, Chao definitely exist in the world of classic Sonic. No, we're never going to show you one, but they do exist, because the canon is definitely real and meaningful and has an impact that matters. And I could go on and on and on. There are so many instances of this where the canon that we are told does not reflect what we see in Sonic. And that's because the Sonic series doesn't operate on canon. There's not some master Bible that explains exactly what the world is like in the history and all the places and that's not a thing. What exists is branding. What exists is a list of rules of what you are and are not allowed to do. And that branding has changed many times over the decades, and that branding doesn't give a fuck about whether or not anything that it says makes sense or is consistent with what came before. The current branding mandates for Sonic say that humans are not allowed to be acknowledged, which then creates issues because, like, what about a character like Shadow, who humans are very pivotal to who he is and what he is? The branding says, whatever, who cares? Just ignore that. Just don't acknowledge it, don't mention it. Which I'm sure the creatives behind Sonic are perfectly fine with, because they do shit like that all the time. What do you mean Knuckles is the guardian of the Master Emerald? No, he's just, he hangs out with Sonic. He doesn't have some duty or anything, doesn't matter. Whatever. But then, Sonic fans come in, and they definitely care about these things, so you gotta provide them some kind of explanation. You can't just tell the truth. You can't just say humans don't exist in Sonic anymore, because that makes no sense given the history of the series. So you have to make up some way to kind of make it fit. And so we get these alleged continents. Like, these continents to me sound like when your puppy dies as a little kid. Your parents say, oh, he went off to the farm and he's gonna be happy there. From my purview, it seems like the lore team's real job is to protect Sonic fans from realizing the reality of the situation, which is simply that the people who make Sonic don't care about canon and will haphazardly throw out things about Sonic that you like because it doesn't fit what they want to do with that particular game. How do the futuristic cities of Sonic Heroes and Sonic Riders fit in the same world as the contemporary cities that we see in the adventure games? They're not supposed to. They just thought it would be cool to have futuristic cities. How is the moon not broken after the events of Sonic Adventure 2? They just didn't want to have a broken moon for the remainder of the Sonic franchise, so they just said fuck it. How are the Chaos Emeralds supposed to be from another planet when they are pivotal to the Earth's cycle of Dark Gaia destroying it and then Light Gaia using the emeralds to put it back together? Whatever, man. They just wanted to have a space monster as the bad guy for Sonic Frontiers, and they thought it'd be cool. Does Shadow need Chaos Emeralds to do Chaos Control? Depends what you're looking at. If it's something like Sonic Adventure 2 or Sonic Prime, then yes. If it's something like Sonic Battle or Sonic 06, then no. Why? Whatever. In fact, here's a fun game we can play. Does anyone want to place bets on whether or not Shadow is going to require a Chaos Emerald in Shadow Generations to use his Chaos powers? I am gonna say he probably doesn't. I'm gonna say he's just able to do all this stuff just by himself. Which, of course, would contradict his most recent representation in Sonic Prime, where he did need a Chaos Emerald, but I think that that would just kind of prove my point if it ended up being that way. And again, I could keep going on. There are so many things like this in the Sonic franchise that just either make no sense and have no explanation, or after the fact, someone came up with some kind of nonsensical explanation to try desperately to make it all fit together. But the real hard truth is that it just doesn't fit together, and it's not meant to fit together. And that is what has resulted in the Sonic series being such an inconsistent, incoherent mess, and that's why so many people are very frustrated with it and why it is the way it is. And that's probably why many people want to see it fixed and want to see a clear Sonic canon. But anything short of a hard reboot is just not gonna get the job done. There's simply too many irreconcilable problems. However, while it is easy to look at the mess that is the Sonic franchise and get very frustrated and annoyed with it and be unhappy with how things are handled, I want to explore this from a different angle and see if we can't think about this in a different way. Because I have a simple question. Why do the people who make Sonic not care about these things? Why have they ignored all this stuff for so long? And when you think about it from that perspective, it's pretty easy to see why. Because it offers them creative freedom. They can do whatever they want with Sonic, and they don't have to be beholden to some almighty canon that they need to maintain. If they want to do something, they can just do it, and they don't need to worry about those kinds of things. And it's because of that mentality that something like Sonic Riders can even exist, because there's much about Sonic Riders that really doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it. Why is Sonic riding on a hoverboard when he's probably faster than it just running on foot? Why does it take place in a futuristic city? Is the whole world of Sonic futuristic? Because that doesn't represent what we've seen before in some games, but it is what we've seen in some other games. I don't know. What does this world look like? Why is there this weird energy in the Riders games where it feels like the entire world revolves around extreme gear? Why is Knuckles just hanging around with Sonic and Tails instead of doing his job on Angel Island? Why is it that apparently the Babylon Rogues are what inspired the ancient myths and legends of genies and flying carpets and stuff, yet that's not represented whatsoever in Sonic and the Secret Rings, a game that takes place entirely within those myths and legends? It's because these things aren't supposed to fit together with anything else. Sonic Riders is just its own little vision of what that team wanted to do with Sonic. They wanted to make a cool sci-fi racing hoverboard game using the Sonic series as its base, and that's what they did, and they just took bits and pieces of Sonic and put it in an arrangement that they wanted for their game and what they wanted to do. And Sonic Riders wouldn't be able to exist in the form that it does any other way. And Sonic Riders is really cool. I really like it. I wouldn't want it to not exist. Similarly, the day and night theming of Sonic Unleashed and the representation of the sun and the moon would not be as strong if it wasn't able to be a proper full moon in that game. If it had to be a broken moon to be consistent with Sonic Adventure 2, then it would weaken the artistic vision of what they were trying to do with Unleashed. If Sonic Superstars wanted to be consistent with the rest of the series, then Amy wouldn't be able to be a playable character because, according to both Sonic R and Sonic Adventure, she wasn't fast at this time. But they wanted Amy to be a playable character, so they said, fuck it, whatever, who cares? If they really wanted to maintain the canon, then Amy would not be playable in Sonic Superstars, and as someone that doesn't even love the idea of Amy being a super fast character, even I wouldn't want that. I like being able to play as Amy. I think they made the right call. I mean, there are ways you can make it work and it would still all make sense, but that would require doing something actually creative and interesting, and they didn't want to do that, so this is what they did instead. Fine. The point I'm getting at here is that the people who make Sonic have deemed a canon something that is not important to the Sonic franchise, and in fact, in some ways, it's kind of detrimental, and they are, in ways, right. There are benefits to not worrying about making sure everything that happens in this universe is consistent. Now, to be clear, I am personally not happy with this approach. I think it has a lot of problems because it kind of devalues what these characters and what this world is. Like Knuckles, what is his character? He's the guardian of the Master Emerald. Well, not really. That's not what he is all the time. Sometimes he's the guardian of the Master Emerald, but other times he's just Sonic's friend that hangs out with him. And so that kind of cheapens the idea of Knuckles. It dilutes what that character is into something less, to something more generic. Not to mention that when you take some previously established aspects of a character or the world and use them, but then don't take the other parts of it that are intrinsically linked, it creates a lot of weirdness and confusion, which leads to the nonsense that we've been getting for so long with Sonic. So there are absolutely problems to this approach, and I would prefer a singular Sonic world that did make sense. But that's not the Sonic that we get. That's not the Sonic that the people who make Sonic want to make. And with the fact that the series has been handling canon and continuity this way for so long, the fact that they're maybe now trying to make it all fit together, the only way you can really do that is with an abhorrent amount of retcons. You basically have to retcon almost every single Sonic game so severely that the games we play barely even represent the canon version of what happened in the Sonic world. For example, if we really wanted to fix the moon problem, then we would have to say that in the canon, there is a version of Sonic Adventure 2's events where the moon isn't blown up. That does not happen. and the actual story of Sonic Adventure 2 itself is a non-canon version of that story. And that is already weird and doesn't sit well with me, that we're just gonna undermine what the game stories themselves are. But the further we go at that, the more problematic it gets. Like, for example, Sonic Advance 3 introduces the character of Gemerald, and at the end of the game, he is reprogrammed and turned into a friendly robot that is shown hanging out with Cream and Vanilla at their home. But then, in the very next Sonic game made by the same group of developers, we go to Cream and Vanilla's home, and Gemerald is nowhere to be seen. And for that matter, Chocola is nowhere to be seen either. They aren't shown, they aren't referenced, they aren't mentioned. It's as if those two characters just stopped existing. What happened to them? Are they just gone? Did they die? What's going on? Well, they do show up in the IDW comics, so there, problem solved, but not really to me, because that just replaces one question with another. Instead of what happened to those characters, I say, where did those characters go for so many games, and why have they suddenly reappeared out of nowhere? To fix that problem, you would have to say that basically every game that's supposed to take place after Sonic Advance 3, there is a retcon version of that game's story where Gemerald is there in situations that would be appropriate for that character to show up. And with the amount of problems like this in Sonic, this retconned canon version of all the events of all the games would be so radically different than the games themselves that I don't even know how a lot of these stories would play out, because fundamental things that they would require would not be allowed to exist. But it goes beyond just logically how many problems there are with this. To me, a much bigger issue with trying to fit all these things together is it also requires undermining the creative choices and intentions of the people who made these games. A good example of that would be something like Eggman Nega, who was created for Sonic Rush, and in that game, very clearly and explicitly, the intention is for Eggman Nega to be Eggman's counterpart from Blaze's world, because Rush is all about those two worlds and how they are directly linked to each other. Blaze is the Sonic of her world, it has the Soul Emeralds to counterpart the Chaos Emeralds, and Eggman Nega is Eggman's counterpart. That's very clearly what they were going for. But then in Sonic Rivals, we have Eggman Nega, and here he's supposed to be Eggman's descendant from the future. And that idea of what Eggman Nega is completely different and directly incompatible with the original idea of what Eggman Nega was supposed to be. So how do you make that work? You can try to marry those two ideas together and say, well, actually, Eggman Nega was lying. He's not really from the Soul Dimension. He's not really Eggman's counterpart. But if we go with that, then that's completely shitting all over the purpose of Eggman Nega and why that character was created. Fuck you to the people who made this character and what you wanted. That's not what the character is anymore, and I find that horrifically disrespectful. And that's one of the more tame versions of this problem. I would say a bigger one would be something like Amy. Because nowadays, you know, we don't want Amy to be all weak and girly and she has to get saved by Sonic because sexism or whatever, so she's turned into an action character and she's just as fast and strong as everybody else. Sure, whatever. But when that also applies to classic Amy, and that's supposed to be the same Amy in all the modern Sonic games, then that creates a problem, because how did Amy go from being really strong in Sonic Superstars to being really weak in Sonic Adventure? We would have to have a retcon version of Sonic Adventure where Amy isn't really weak, but that would completely undermine the whole theme of her story in that game. So to create a coherent version of the Sonic canon that wants to incorporate these new ideas means deleting the best story Amy's character has ever received. Yeah, that's definitely a much better way to handle it. I'm so glad we have a canon now. While you're at it, why don't we retcon Knuckles and Rouge's relationship in Sonic Adventure 2? The kind of, like, sexual tension between them. You know, the entire reason that Rouge was created? That doesn't fit modern Sonic branding. We don't want to have any kind of romantic anything whatsoever in existence, so just delete that. The entire reason Rouge exists, not a thing anymore. And of course, if you really want to get into it, then any Sonic game that has humans would have to have some kind of retcon version where no humans exist in any of those stories. How does that work for games like SA2 or Shadow or oh 06? I have no idea, but that would have to be a thing if we want to make a version of Sonic that is coherent and consistent with the current version that we see. These are the kinds of things that a Sonic canon would give us. If you really wanted to fix all the problems, then that means getting rid of so much of the stuff that makes this series and these stories and these characters good whatsoever. Of course, it wouldn't necessarily have to be this way, but considering that these are the current brand guidelines of what Sonic is, that is what it would have to be. And if that's what a Sonic canon looks like, then I don't want a canon. Fuck that. Why isn't Gemerald or Chocola in Sonic Rush? Because they decided that that's not really a valuable character and they just didn't want to use him anymore, so they just didn't use him anymore. I can be okay with that. If we just get away from this idea of canon being something that Sonic needs, that is something important, that it should have, then all these problems melt away. Instead of thinking of canon in Sonic as some very rigidly established thing, it's carved into stone and now it's set forever and you have to follow those rules. Think of canon as clouds, and over time, they'll shift and they'll take many different forms and they will look different. And sometimes some things will show up and then sometimes those things will go away. And maybe they'll come back, but they'll be a little bit different than last time. And is that particular version of the thing ever gonna come back again? I don't know, maybe, if we feel like it. Like, here's the thing I want to point out that I never see any Sonic fans talk about. Shadow being a part of Gun, that is only a thing in Sonic 06. Outside of that one game, that has never been mentioned or acknowledged anywhere ever. So, what's the deal there? In the view of a rigidly structured canon, after the events of Shadow the Hedgehog, Shadow joined Gun, and then he's just not part of it anymore or something? I don't know. But in the eyes of a cloudy canon, then in that one particular game, they made a version of Shadow where he was a part of Gun, because they thought that would be a cool idea, and then that version of Shadow went away, and maybe some ideas and some elements from that Shadow were taken from other things, and maybe later versions of Shadow will take from that version of Shadow. But that one specific version of Shadow was transient. It existed for the events of Sonic 06, and then it went away. This view of Sonic canon, or I suppose rather a lack of canon, the way that the people that make Sonic actually approach Sonic, it's more just a playground, a bunch of toys that you can pick up any toy, and you can do whatever you want with them. You can pick up the Knuckles toy and say, I'm the Guardian of the Master Emerald, and this is what I'm gonna do. Or someone else can pick up that toy and say, I'm the guy that punches things, and I'm strong, and I'm Sonic's friend that'll be there for him whenever he needs me. And those are both fine. It's not one Knuckles every single time. It's not the same Knuckles every single time. It's not meant to be. It's just people taking the idea of Knuckles and putting their own spin on it and making it work for what they want to do. Sometimes that'll mean following what's previously established, and sometimes that'll mean throwing that away and saying, nah, not this time. This time we're gonna do something different. This is how the Sonic series really operates. There is no canon. There is only a playground of characters and ideas and events, and the creators will pluck out whichever particular ones they want, and they'll use them how they want. I don't love that this is how this is done, and I'm sure many other people don't like it either, but we can continue to whine and complain about it and accomplish nothing, or we can just get over it and accept that this is what Sonic is, and just enjoy it for what it is. When a new Sonic thing comes out, instead of discussing, how does this fit into the canon? What if instead we talked about whether or not the story is good? I mean, I don't know, maybe I've just been worn down after so many years and I've given up on the idea of Sonic ever making sense, and I've just decided to take the garbage that they give me. But I've started to come to like this way of handling Sonic, of not really caring that much about the world of Sonic and what is and is not established. Because then it kind of lets Sonic transcend the typical rules of what a fictional character is allowed to do. Sonic Adventure 2 is what if Sonic was in a shonen action anime movie, where Sonic 06 is what if Sonic was in a JRPG. Sonic Rush Adventure is what if Sonic was in a Treasure Island-style pirate adventure story. Sonic Unleashed is what if Sonic was in a big-budget Hollywood animated film. And in a way, that is kind of fitting and appropriate for a character and series like Sonic. He's always traveling the world and seeing what's out there, and the series itself is doing the same thing. Traveling to different interpretations of itself, to different ideas, to different genres of storytelling, and seeing what happens if you put Sonic in that scenario. It does mean that Sonic as a franchise itself doesn't have a very strong singular vision or identity, but I would argue, especially throughout the 2000s games, that kind of became Sonic's identity. It became a series that just does all kinds of crazy, weird stuff. And these days, I'm starting to think I kind of prefer that to the idea of having a Sonic canon, at least the way they want to handle it.